Hello movie nerds, and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we are going to talk about the new drama series that just recently hit Netflix called Boy Swallows Universe. This one is coming out of Australia. It has a pretty incredible cast, and honestly, there are a couple of people in this TV series that not only was I really surprised to see them, but I was blown away by their performance. So this one stars Travis Fimmel, Phoebe Tonkin, Simon Baker, Lee Hawley, I believe is what his name is, who plays Gus Bell, Felix Cameron. So this television series is based on the book of the same name, and it was written by a journalist called Trent Dalton. Now, Trent Dalton wrote this fiction book based on some of the experiences that he went through as a kid, but that is not to say that this television series is true. Like, it is based on a true story in the way that I would consider Texas Chainsaw Massacre based on Ed Gein, right? So there are some things that are similar to his life, but this is definitely a fictionalized, exaggerated, far beyond what his life could have possibly been, that he just kind of writes about. And I think it is an incredible story. Now, I will say I really enjoyed kind of the beginning half or so of this show. And then once the character of Eli Bell, who is kind of our main protagonist, I'll talk about why I don't really think that that is a little bit later, but when he grows up and is kind of 17, that is when I feel like the show kind of nosedives into weird land. It's kind of the hold my beer section of this television series. Boy Swallows Universe is basically the story of Eli Bell, who is a child in this. You kind of see him over the period of 4 years, and it runs through some series of events in his life surrounding his mom going to prison, his stepdad disappearing, kind of getting to see his dad again, who is an alcoholic, and kind of centered around this criminal underbelly, if you will, that is happening in Australia, in Brisbane in the 1980s. Now, I am not very familiar with like the 1980s in Brisbane. I hear that this is pretty true to form of what Brisbane would have been like in the 1980s. That is horrifying to me if that is true. Like, this television show is one of those things where if you guys want to stop people from traveling to Australia, just show them Boy Swallows Universe because terrifying the events that happen in this story. Now, my unpopular opinion and why I say that I don't think that Eli Bell was really the protagonist is my unpopular opinion is that Eli Bell is actually just as much a bad guy in this series as all of the bad guys are. I know that Eli Bell's character is probably meant to be a self-insert of the author, but I think that a lot of what happens in this show, and again, this is my personal opinion, kind of the majority of the really horrific, terrible things that happen to Eli Bell and his family are like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. Like, Eli Bell was not my favorite character in this. Gus Bell, his older brother, would hands down to me be the outstanding protagonist. He very much reminds me of like the Samwise Gamgee kind of character in this. He is absolutely outstanding. He is kind of like that force of good through the whole thing, whereas Eli Bell's character really is fucking annoying, if I can just say that. Like, he does a lot of things that people tell him not to do. He opens his mouth and talks constantly, and really what sets into motion his family being pulled into this horrible shithouse, if you will, and what ends up happening to like his stepfather, who is Travis Fimmel's character of Lyle. Basically, all of that bad stuff comes out of things that Eli Bell figures out and says out loud because he just can't shut up and like do as he's told. It's really outstanding, and a lot of the bad things that happen to him, I think, are really because of things that he's doing. Like, he's going too far and putting himself in places that he shouldn't necessarily be. And his brother is kind of the polar opposite of that, which is why I feel like he really is the main protagonist of the show. Like, I feel like Eli Bell's character has the potential to really go into like psychopath headlong if he wanted to, or if the story felt like his character could do that. I think it was close. He's like walking a fine line. And maybe you would disagree with me on that, but that is kind of my take on it, is like that's sort of how I saw his character of not really necessarily doing the right thing ever, but somehow being the person that comes out of it as like the great, hero or whatever, the one that everyone looks to and thinks is the hero. And I don't see him as that at all. But this show really kind of astonished me. Like I said, I think that towards the end, it does dive into kind of crazy land. I think because the beginning of the show felt so quote unquote true to life, with some exceptions, like there are definitely some exaggerations happening, the ending felt a little bit too like whimsical isn't even the right word, but fictionalized and like crazy, that it just sort of felt a little bit out of place to me. But overall, this series was absolutely incredible. I would have to say it is probably one of the best television series that I have seen come out in at least a year, if not a couple years. Like, this is something that I feel like is incredible writing. The acting in this is absolutely astonishing. Like, Simon Baker's character of Robert Bell, it took me a while. Like, I was watching the series and I hadn't really looked up any of the cast or any of the notes on it or what the story was about. And I kept thinking to myself, like, oh my God, he looks so familiar. And I couldn't place his face until I went in and actually looked up the cast. And I was like, oh my God, because he's just like this raging alcoholic kind of. He has panic attacks and a giant beer gut, and is just not at all what I think of when I think of Simon Baker. But his face is, the same and similar, but they've, grunged him up a bit. Phoebe Tonkin in this series, I think, is absolutely like one of the people that steals the show. I don't think that I have ever seen her in a role where she did this exceptional of a job. And I'm not meaning that when she was like on Vampire Diaries and stuff that she didn't do a good job, but I feel like that is not something that I necessarily took all that serious. But her role in this is outstanding. Travis Fimmel, I think, does an amazing job. The kids do amazing jobs. I will say that I don't know that they picked the absolute best person to play Eli Bell when he is older. Again, this goes through about 4 years of his life. I prefer the younger kid. I think the younger kid really just went for it in terms of acting, whereas I feel like the older boy just felt not quite as emotionally driven, or at least didn't come off that way as much. And I get he's, a little bit older and stuff, but it just felt a little bit disjointed because you do skip some time in between there. But I would highly recommend Boy Swallows Universe. Absolutely, absolutely. I would be very surprised if this one doesn't win some awards or something. I think it was an outstanding series. So let me know what you guys think if you have watched Boy Swallows Universe. Subscribe if you want to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.